So, what if Britain didn't survive past 2029? A very interesting book. The author, anonymous, although we can probably guess at the actual authorship of it, probably from several sources. Well, the nativists, as Professor Betts calls them, and many other people as well, not just Betts, are referred to as the Heritage British, a thoroughly uninspiring name, one might add. But in truth, the book itself is chilling. It is a damning insight into a blueprint, which could be a historical blueprint of what is to come, highly likely. And we can see all of these factors, these socio-political factors and economic factors, converging at this moment in time to create the very situation outlined in this book. Apparently, it's an hypothesis, an imaginary future, which might not happen. But in truth, I think if we look at what happened after Stockport last year, which is one of the photographs in the actual thumbnail for this podcast, uh, and obviously the incidents ongoing throughout this year with the migrant hotel protests and the battle for freedom of expression against an increasingly Soviet-style tyranny, and the development, obviously, or the furtherance of the Red Green Alliance. So, if those don't know what the Red Green Alliance is, that's the alliance between Islam and the communists, quite frankly, the left. Let's just call them communists because, in truth, that's what they are. They're communists. That's the umbrella term. They class everyone else as far right, so we'll just call them communists. Perhaps we should just call, Islam as Islamists, yes? As they seem to brand everyone else far right who dares to criticize them. So this is the scenario, and I've just demonstrated it there perfectly, i.e., several groups of people who can no longer live with each other in harmony. Not like they've ever lived in harmony anyway. The diversity is a delusion. That's the reason why I call it the diversity delusion. There is diversity in the context that many different communities live in this country, but peace, harmony, tolerance, it's a myth. It's fantasy. It's a left-wing fantasy. And it's not, well, I said just left wing fantasy, the uni party fantasy, which is leftism full stop. Even the Tory party falls into that categorization. But the book itself, well, you know, I would definitely advise people to read it. It's it's shocking in many ways, not just because of its conclusions, which we'll get to in a moment, but the actual process of civil war and how it begins. So the basic supposition of the book is that Farage is tipped to win in 2029. Reform UK is ahead in the polls, but they don't manage to secure enough seats. And Labour get in with a Peace Party coalition, which is pretty much like another left green faction, allied with Islamists. And they form a government and they start to impose harmony, the harmony fancy on people by force, that is. Absolutely. And then we see the emergence of the community protection units, allied to and supporting the police. And the big demonstrations, which we see how demonstrations are handled differently in this country. Two-tier policing is an absolute fact. It's not an opinion. It certainly is not a supposition of any description. It exists. We all know it exists. Only the regime lies about it and its corrupt media. The rest of us know it exists. And so in Westminster, the police are ordered not to intervene by the Home Secretary, thus sparking off an extremely violent incident, a clash between what I will call the nativists. The book doesn't call them nativists, it calls them heritage British, which I find an absolutely ridiculous description. So I'll call heritage British the nativists, okay? The nativists against the Red Green Alliance. So that's what happens. A number of people are killed. This is the hypothesis. Serious injuries, hundreds injured. And the police have to intervene eventually, and they're overwhelmed rapidly. This obviously is the Kickstarter for what in an historical context, because the book is written in a retrospect, and it's based on the supposed oral testimony of a number of survivors. And it's absolutely damning, because just about every page that I turned, and I bought it on the Kindle edition. This is why I'm not actually making, a piece to camera uh, review of the book, because I don't have the hard copy of it. I bought it on Kindle. It's only $2.99. Well worth $2.99, most definitely. Probably worth a bit more, but well worth $2.99. And I'd advise people to read it, because one thing that I think stood out to me in my mind, practically every page, was the words of Enoch Powell, like the Roman. I see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. And then later in the book, it gets on to prevention is better than cure. Well, of course it always is, isn't it? And that also brings to mind the dire warnings of the National Front and the British National Party over a number of decades to try and halt this immigration catastrophe that causes the civil war in this so-called hypothetical book. I don't think it is a hypothesis. I think it parallels reality very closely. It converges with all of the events that are taking place right now. We can see them quite clearly before our own eyes, and the growing tyrannical suppression of freedom of expression, particularly of the nativist community, who refuse to accept their replacement. And anyone campaigning against the grooming gangs, wanting civil justice, justice for their children who've been abused, etc., is smeared, tarred and feathered, brutalized. But the book takes it one step further, in that hostilities have begun, and they're actually being killed for it. And the police aren't doing anything. And then a rally takes place with over 80,000 nativists, led by Tommy Robinson, and the police are ordered to go in hard to stop it, to stop the rally from reaching Westminster. And the Home Secretary has ordered this. He's later assassinated on the London Underground near St Pancras. And obviously the Heritage British are delighted by that. And the Heritage British are led by a former SAS trooper, a sergeant, Arthur Pendragon, alias Arthur Pendragon. And, the book is not the obvious conclusion that I think most people would think it would be, i.e., the Heritage British, the nativists, overwhelm the Red Green Alliance. Now, on the contrary, what happens is the Reds had used the Greens, i.e., the Islamists, thinking that they would be a bulwark in their opposition of everything to do with Britain and Britishness. And as it transpires in the book, that the Islamists are simply far too radical and violent, and eventually they decide they don't need the Reds anymore, and they start to dispose of them. And it's damning, in truth, because it shows a situation where France has become an Islamic republic by a slender majority. And when the cities go up and the nativists retreat into the hinterland, particularly into the Welsh Hills, etc., and Scotland, and other rural areas, that an invasion force of over 50,000 Islamists, volunteers from France and all over the Middle East, actually sail across the English Channel unopposed. The nativists have abandoned the Channel ports because they just couldn't maintain their defence, and retreated inland to defensive positions there, which are very quickly lost and overwhelmed. There's a damning scene also, the Siege of York, in which, and it's deliberately meant to be so, it shows treachery by an Irish Catholic who believes that, in truth, the greater threat is Zionism, and he opens the gates of York, Micklegate, in fact. The Islamists pull through it, and they slaughter over 3,000 Jews in the Micklegate area of York, i.e. a neo-pogrom. It would have to be a neo-pogrom, wouldn't it? And the book is just full of carnage, mass murder, slaughter, the imposition of Islam, the total failure of leftism, and the eventual total total eradication of leftism by murderous means carried out by the Islamists. And of course, the nativists have no compromise at all with the left. So the left just disappears from the equation completely, which is very interesting. And then, we have the Battle of Liverpool, the Siege of Liverpool, and the nativists have to surrender control of the city, and they evacuate over to the Isle of Man and to Ireland. And then President Vance, because there is a terrible atrocity carried out by the Islamists there in the Islamic Republic of Britain, a caliphate. This is what the book is hypothesizing. And the President Vance decides that they have to intervene militarily. So American forces are bombing Islamist strongholds across southeast England, and they land in three different places in the British Isles: Wales, England, and Scotland, and begin the process of establishing bridgeheads and creating fortified areas, specifically to return Britain to British control. But the Chinese intervene, because obviously the geopolitical drama is unfolding, and the Chinese intervene and say to the Americans, look, we are going to intervene militarily on behalf of the Islamists, because they've struck a deal with France, which is under Islamist control. And this is the nightmare scenario unfolding in the book. And so Vance is forced to accept compromise, which divides Britain, what's left of Britain, into two. There's the Islamic Republic of Britain, which becomes 65 million strong, and the actual nativist area has a total population of less than 4 million. And towards the end of the book, the author, the anonymous author, makes the point repeatedly that demographics is destiny. Well, we all know demographics is destiny, and that is the whole objective behind replacement migration. Yes, that's the UN compact, isn't it? Replacement migration. Not a conspiracy theory at all in the slightest. It's a policy fact, and we all know that to be true. And so that's what this book is doing, is paralleling events, recent, and then projecting an hypothesis of how a civil war could begin. But the horrendous conclusion of it is that the majority of young nativists have emigrated to Canada, America, and Australia, and they don't want anything to do with what's left of so-called Britain, and that the Chinese withdraw their peacekeepers, and eventually the two sides are squaring up to each other, with because of demographics as destiny and sheer volume of numbers, sheer weight of numbers, that the Islamists are guaranteed to win, because the nativists just don't have the numbers to repel them. Heavily armed and under American protection, but also the American Congress, support in the American Congress is starting to waver because of the sheer cost of the military operation in what's left of Britain. And, there are serious questions being asked. Is it worth it? Is Britain worth it? What's left of Britain? And the whole time, the Islamic Caliphate, the Islamic Republic of Britain, is bringing in exclusively Muslim immigrants from across the world. And the book truly is a dismal, terrible warning of what mass immigration is creating in this country. And anyone who thinks Farage is the solution, well, actually, Farage gets assassinated in the book. Tommy Robinson is murdered in prison by the state. And anyone who thinks Farage, Ben Habib, and Rupert Lowe and Tommy Robinson are the solution are just living in cloud cuckoo land, because all of them support the very mass immigration that causes the civil war outlined in the book. And it is truly chilling. But anyone who ignores it and thinks, oh, well, this is just pie in the sky fancy, as most silly white liberals will, and leftists, of course, they're deluded. Well, I would advise you to read it and to study it in depth, because I don't think it is as much hypothesis as people would like to pretend, and certainly not the anonymous authors. No, on the contrary, this is a book that is absolutely terrifying, quite frankly, from a nativist point of view. And I would advise everyone to read it, all nativists to read it, because this is what's going to happen if the nativists don't get their act together. And I see it coming quite clearly. Yes, it's one of the most terrifying books I've ever read, and I heartily recommend it to everyone. Please read it.